Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And Heidi Ho, it is the mayor, the governor of the great state of Texas, the guy who's in charge of a little bit of real estate in Texas, Mr. Michael Becker. Michael, how are you?
Hey, Paul, doing good. How's it going today for you?
Oh, it's hot in Texas. Like everything, it is real estate in Texas is hot, but it's 105 degrees here in Texas, so it's really hot these days. Let's not forget the Old Capital Conference coming up here October 4th and 5th in Dallas, Texas. That's the premier event for Old Capital. You know, we bring in 500 or 600 people, investors, limited partners, vendors, just like the gentleman we're going to be speaking with today. We bring in people that are just authorities in the multifamily space, and we want you to be there. It's a large event. It's going to be at the Frontiers of Flight Museum in Dallas, Texas, right next to Love Field, October 4th and 5th. Go to the oldcapitalconference.com, oldcapitalconference.com to get your tickets to kind of join us. It's a large RSVP event that we want you to be there. Any words of wisdom, Michael?
No, yeah, I think I would definitely recommend everyone hopping online and buying a ticket and coming out. There's lots of people doing deals that are going to be in that room. So lots of brokers and vendors and other apartment owners. So it's always a great event to attend.
You know, we always talk about death and taxes. Hopefully I'm not dying anytime soon, but we have to always talk about taxes. And so on Sunday, I'm headed out on a trip to go out to a place that I own a second house at. And I got to go out and fight my personal property taxes on a rental property or a house that I own out there. So they've gone and they've reassessed me this year incredibly high. And so I have to actually go out there myself, fight in the property tax assessor. I have 5 minutes to be in front of an assessor to try to make my case. I don't know if a lot of states do that. The state of Texas, you can do it, or you just really call in the professionals that on your behalf that can talk with the taxing authorities, and they can give their words of wisdom of how to get your property taxes down. So in the podcast today, we're going to be talking about not so much death. Sometimes it's very painful, but it's not so painful. We're going to be talking about property taxes in the state of Texas. With us today is Mark Cantrell with Cantrell McCulloch. They're one of the premier groups that kind of help you fight property taxes, try to make them lower on your behalf, on the partnership's behalf. And I'm going to turn this over to Michael. And Michael, want to begin the discussion with Mark? And again, Mark, thanks very much for being here. Appreciate it.
For sure.
Yeah. So Cantrell McCulloch is one of the groups that we use to help with our taxes. Use Mark's partner, Bobby McCulloch. So he's been doing our taxes for the decade now, I guess. Maybe kind of just start, Mark, by giving a little background on yourself and your firm. It's kind of real high level. What do you guys do at Cantrell McCulloch?
Okay, good deal. Thanks, guys. And thanks, Paul, for the kind words. Property tax business, I tell people we're kind of a necessary evil. I believe, I'm biased, but I really believe strongly that you need a property tax consultant to help you minimize your property taxes. So I used to do it for myself before I started the company, and then I became partners with Bobby McCulloch, and I learned so much. I was missing out on a lot of different ways of approaching the value. But the Cantrell McCulloch, we started in 2001. We started with 0 properties. We were a little bit nervous. It was kind of a secondary business that I was in the brokerage business. Bobby was in the tax business with another firm. And we started the company in 2001. This past year in 2023 or 2022, we represented almost 50 billion in property values across Texas. And we're also in 29 other states, but 95% of our business is in Texas. This year, we're going to be well over $50 billion in values that we represent. And we believe our tax savings, there were 130 million actual tax savings to our clients in 2022. We believe that number this year will be in excess of 150 million. Now, part of that, you can pat ourselves on the back, but the appraisal districts have still been very aggressive on their increases in their assessments. And we've seen that really happen in the last 3 to 5, 7 years. I feel like going forward, we're starting to become more of a normal market. I believe that the tax assessments, the tax assessors are not going to be quite as aggressive going forward. So we will not be able to obviously save 150 million in taxes, I don't think, in 2024, just because I don't think the appraisal districts will come out of the gate with these aggressive notice increases.
I hope you're right. Every year, last 4 or 5 years, it felt like it was a catch-up year every year for the last 4 or 5 years. But I guess that speaks to the strength of the market that we've been in, and the values have escalated quite a bit. That the appraisal districts were a little slower to kind of catch up, and they sure have caught up across the board. Maybe it's a good thing to kind of start talking about too. So I don't know if you have any stats, I'll put you on the spot, but what kind of average growth have we seen kind of year over year and valuations in Texas or on your book that you guys represent? You guys mainly focus on multifamily, correct?
Yeah, we're probably about 2/3 multifamily. In value, it may be a little bit more than that. But I would say, I don't have the stats in front of me, but the increases we've seen across Texas has been between 10 and almost 20% increase in the overall multifamily values. Now, I would say it's probably closer to 10% in most markets. We've seen some appraisal districts that have been so sleepy with their values, the smaller counties in Texas, where they're really so far behind, 30-40% of what properties are trading for, they're assessed at. And we've seen those counties really, really catch up in the last couple of years. The state comptroller does a tax audit every other year on every single county in Texas, 254 counties. So they try to, make sure that the counties are keeping up with market value. So when you see a lot of sales in a small county, in the past, we've seen very few sales. The tertiary markets are on fire, just like Dallas, Fort Worth, and secondary markets. Once we started seeing more sales in those smaller counties, and those counties have really become aggressive because they were so far behind. Even the bigger major counties, we're still, Michael, you might not totally agree, but I think you might agree that really values are still not quite at 100%, but it's just the nature of the product, of the way that taxes are assessed.
I think in Travis County, they went a little too far in
Travis,
a lot of cases.
You're exactly 100% right. Now, Travis is an exception. And gosh, we have lots of problems down there, just as you know.
Yeah. So I think really the purpose of wanting to come on one of the main things I want you to kind of talk about is there's going to be some pending tax reform that should pass in November, just got signed by the governor of Texas, and that'll be on the ballot in November. And it seemed like it's a rubber stamp. But before that, really, we had the last time there was some major tax changes was in 2019. And maybe kind of talk about how, for those that maybe aren't familiar, we're not a cap state, we're a non-disclosure state in Texas, and values can go up, uncapped right now. So that's one component of it is the assessed value, which is what you guys work on and fight for your clients to lower the value. And then the other part of it is the millage rate that you pay to the various taxing authorities, the county, cities, school districts, et cetera. Maybe kind of talk through how it was and what happened in 2019, and then we can talk a little bit later about the upcoming tax reform and what are the impacts that people are seeing that own large multifamily buildings in Texas.
Okay, good question. The two components, like you said, to the tax rate, the millage rate and then the assessment. The millage rate in 2019, the legislature, it's been a hot topic the last several. They meet every 2 years. 2019, this year they met 2021, 2023. But in 19, they made a really historic change in the way that the entities are looking at how they can tax and use their millage rate for properties. And so it's been a decades-old provision in the law where if there's a revenue growth of 8% or greater, then the taxpayers can request a rollback in the tax rate. You have to put it in front of a vote, and then you get a rollback in the tax rate, 8% revenue growth. not property specific, but overall revenue growth in the entity. And then they changed it in 2019 as a historic move. And Patrick in Betancourt, Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor, was really behind this. And they reduced the revenue growth to 3.5% for the city and the county rate and 2.5% for the school rate. Now, the school rate comprises about 50 to 55, even 60% of the overall tax rate. So in effect, it was a 3% revenue growth cap put in place in 2019, replacing the 8%. So that forced cities to not be able to remain, keep their tax rate constant or even reduce it slightly. They had to adhere to that, new percentage. And so we've seen the last 3 to 5 years, the tax rates finally compressing, which they should. I mean, we've had this robust commercial growth. We've had this robust residential growth. So, I mean, the tax rate should be going down, and they're finally reacting to that 2019 big reduction in the state, how they do taxes.
So like you're saying, so we're getting assessed last handful of years, and our values are growing, say 10% on the tax roll. But in effect, with the compression on the millage rate, it really has been closer to 3% growth overall. Now that's not all equal, obviously, because that's overall. So you're probably getting pinged a little bit harder than that. And then there's the residential side. You have a homestead cap, so a lot of those values are even further behind. So probably falls a little bit more on commercial real estate owners than it does your single family homeowner.
Yeah, like example 2022 taxes, Michael, they were down in Austin almost a little over 9%. In
millage rate.
Dallas, the millage rate. In Dallas, the value went down almost 5%, the millage rate. A few other counties, let's see, Richardson, 6%, San Antonio, only 3%, Waco, 3%. It's the smallest was in Denton, 2%. So you can see the compression that they put in place in 2019, or the percentage of the revenue growth has really helped doing the compression. And I think it will keep going further, because today the Dallas paper said that the overall commercial and residential tax base growth in Dallas County was a little over 11% this year. Now, you have to exclude the way the taxes are done. You exclude the new construction when you look at the revenue growth count. You subtract that out. It's same store type properties. And so if it went up 11%, you take out the new construction, the revenue growth is going to be in excess of 3.5%, I would suspect. Yep. So we may see some further compression again this year, although the cities and the counties, they don't really want to give up their taxes, as we all know. And so the governments in these cities are a little, they're a little bit more tax friendly versus the state overall.
Yeah. And so that's what happened in 19. So it's been obviously helped to counteract to some degree, not all the way, the valuation growth. And then now here recently, I think it was last week, the governor signed in the bill that's going to go on the ballot in November to further reduce these school districts' tax rate. So we'll maybe kind of talk through what's on the ballot, and it is going to pass, right? That seems like it's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will pass overwhelmingly. But it was an $18 billion tax cut is what's proposed. And what it's going to do is buy down the main focus of it that we'll talk about for multifamily owners is the tax rate is going to go down 10.7 cents for the school taxes. Now, again, remember the school taxes comprise a little bit more than 50% of the tax rate. So depending on where you are, here's the percentages this will affect the overall tax rate. If you're in San Antonio, it's only 3.9%. If you're in Dallas, 4.3%. If you're in the city of Fort Worth, 4.2%. Austin, it's 5.4%. If you're in Plano, 5.6%. Houston, 4.9%. Those are some of the major cities.
So to set another way, if you own a property in Austin, and you get a 5.4% savings, you owe $100,000 in annual taxes, that'll go to a little bit below 95,000, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
5,400, you'll have, it'll go to 95. Exactly. So then that's assuming that there's no further compression in the tax rate for the city or the county rate. And we could see some further compression. Like I said, the revenue growth caps are in place. And so we think that Patrick was really big about reducing the tax rate as much as he could and then giving homeowners a bigger homestead exemption. In the House of Representatives, which is the other component that was negotiating and figuring out what we're going to do with the budget surplus, they were more in tune and wanting a cap on commercial and residential. Residential still has a 10% cap in place now. They wanted to reduce that to 5% and then add commercial. Really, caps, they really don't work for commercial values because they just fluctuate so much, commercial properties. And so they did input a 20% cap. It's a pilot program for the next 3 years for any properties under $5 million. So that's, that could be a significant thing because as we know, most of the properties are worth less than 5 million or assessed less than 5 million across Texas, not the big apartment complexes, obviously. So it could have some impact, but they can't go up more than 20%. What we think will really happen is if you have an individual condo property, really might help you because the values have been very sleepy on some of those properties across all of Texas.
Right. So just having multiple tax parcels on one property versus most large apartment buildings have one tax parcel, so that have the lower values. So crystal ball here, a lot of large apartment owners, say such as our firm, we're seeing these values go up. But are you thinking in a municipality like Austin with the growth, or one like Dallas, or we're talking with the savings you kind of mentioned, 4 to kind of 5.5%, give or take, is what you just kind of rattled off from the new bill that's going to pass, plus the compression? Are we thinking we're going to see somewhere around 8, 10, 11% millage rate compression when it's all said and done?
Well, that's probably too aggressive, Mike. Austin did go down 9.3 last year. They're one of the lower millage rates at 1.97 per $100 in value. I think some entities you could see maybe 7-8%. I think the majority of them are going to be closer to 5%. I don't think the cities or the counties are going to go down that much. There's ways they can do the math, and it kind of amazes me because every year recently, Dallas, for example, Dallas County, the growth's been close to 10%, but it really hadn't affected the rate that much. It's a little bit confusing. I mean, I've studied it. I've had other people study it. It's not real easy to calculate. So I'd like to forecast now that the tax roll is certified for Dallas. I'm going to try to forecast what we think the overall reduction in the rate could be, but I don't know that yet.
Okay. And then as far as, so that's the rate. So obviously we've seen some pain in the values, but we are starting to see some relief in the rate. And then, and like we said, every year feels like it's been a catch-up year for the last several years.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? I mean, to us, it seems like we certainly have peaked in pricing and now it's come off the peak. So the trades that are happening in 2023, albeit limited, are at lower valuations than they likely would have traded at 22 or maybe in some cases 21. So it would seem to be to think that the big robust growth in taxes is going to be muted for the next handful of years. Would you concur with that assessment?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think it's really your actual taxes that you're going to owe on a multifamily asset in Texas is likely going to be very minimal, if any, increase in the actual taxes you pay.
Starting in 24.
Starting in 24, correct.
Hey, Mike, a real quick question. How does the taxing authority calculate taxes? We said at the beginning, this is a non-disclosure state, but how do they figure out what values are? So do they take the NOI times the cap rate into the deal? How is it calculated? Because that's the one thing I never really could understand is valuation.
Well, let's Mark that question. How do they do that, Mark?
Well, that's a good question. It's a little bit more complicated But really it isn't, I guess. They have to mass appraise because the entities, I mean, they look at the DCAT or they look at in Houston, HCAT, there are a lot of properties. And so they can't look at each individual one, Paul. Obviously, they have to do some form of mass appraisal. And the appraisal districts will tell you that. They try to take sales, they try to look at, see what rents are doing, see what vacancies are, and they try to determine, okay, this is what we feel like the market is doing. And so they provide, as a tax consultant or as an owner, you can request the information from the appraisal district, Paul, on how they're assessing your property. They have to provide you that information. And so what they have, they come up with the income and expense model, and they'll have what they believe your income is, what they believe your expenses are, and then they will put an arbitrary count on the property. Okay, so the way we go about trying to minimize these taxes is we go, okay, is the income right? So you have to provide a rent roll and P&L statement. We look and see if there's anything in there that we can say, look at the numbers, they're trending downward, they're, different things, that the occupancy is really falling off. And then we hone in on the expense ratio. We argue about that. Insurance has gone crazy. Appraisal districts are still not comfortable using $1,000 or more a unit on insurance. I mean, just a few years ago, it was $300. And so we're having to argue that. Reserves, they're not $250 anymore, not $300 anymore. They're a lot bigger. So the expense ratios are a big number that we argue. And we argue the cap rate, obviously. We did a cap rate study this year, and we commissioned it with some other consulting firms. And that, we're trying to figure out, hey, what's really the cap rate January 1? We have some disagreements big time with some of the appraisal districts. Some of them are very reasonable, and the appraisal districts are not your enemy. They're not trying to be difficult as far as what the value should be assessed at. They just want to get a true value. And so it's a situation where we try to go in and we try to look at how they're looking at it. And we go, no, this is wrong here. You're right here. This is wrong here. And then we come up with a value. Sometimes we are in agreement, and then sometimes we have to litigate. So, I mean, it's a 3-step process, the protest. Informally, ARB, appraisal review board hearing, or litigation. And so we litigate about 10% of our properties, probably a year, maybe closer to 15%.
Got it.
One more question for Mark. One of the things, and you guys do such a great job for all of our clients out there that are trying to fight the valuation on the assessed value of the properties. But one of the things I keep on hearing from a lot of folks is that now some of the taxing authorities have just critical data from like TREP.
Yeah.
And then they can get the actual information about what the expenses are of what the current ownership group pushes over to, say, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and then they buy a subscription to TREP who shows them everything. So it's like playing poker with somebody who already knows what your cards are.
Well, that's a good point. Some of the bigger districts have got TREP now. And so if it's agency lending that you've used to finance your property, then TREP covers what the appraisal was when you bought the property. They've got your income and expense statement, and they got your rent roll. So you can't trick the district and try to provide them fictitious information. And I mean, sometimes we'll see some owners. This year we had a couple of owners, and we had to fire. We can't go in there and hurt a reputation by giving them bad information. And especially now that the appraisal districts have got the information for TREP. So you have to be careful. But Paul, the way we've been able in this last cycle, in the last 3 to 5 years, I would say for multifamily protests, I would say probably 95% of them have been settled using the equal and uniform protest method, not the income expense model. When we started the company in 2001, for the first 10, 15 years, income expense model, that was the way you settle values. But now, taking a look at the equal and uniform, you have to be fairly assessed in relation to the comparable properties. You have to adjust for rents, but you have to be assessed fairly. And so that has given us the best number way better than the income and expense model. So even though the appraisal districts have TREP, we still have ways of minimizing the increase.
Mike, could you explain what TREP is?
So it's just a aggregated or data service that aggregates a bunch of the reporting you give to the lenders, and then they just have it offered by subscription. So like Mark said, a lot of those big owners and now all the counties are paying for subscriptions. So like you mentioned, you can't share one set of books with your lender and a different set of books with the county, because that's called fraud. So you're defrauding one of those two people if you do that. So that's so I think that's part of what Cantrell McCulloch does, is they try to find the various angles to go argue. And I think one of the bigger ones, like you said, is the equal uniform statute, where you can't tax my property at a higher value than the one down the street that's a very similar vintage and like kind. So if they're going to give them an assessment at 100,000 unit, it's not fair for me to be assessed at 120. So even if the income of mine is a little higher, so you can go in and make those arguments. That's where most of the protest comes from when you litigate, in particular, right, Mark?
Yes. Now the Class A product is more black and white. It's closer to construction. It's rolling off the construction appraisal method, and so the newer constructed deals, they're not as easy to do equal and uniform. It's more like I said, black and white. The appraisal district has their data. They are on top of the market. They're getting very astute with what is actually occurring. And so it's kind of getting down to, hey, is this really, a 5 cap deal? Should it be a 5.5? What should the cap rate be? So that's why we commissioned the cap rate study this year, because that's becoming a real sticking point, especially for the Class A.
Well, kind of as we wrap up here, is there anything else that maybe multifamily owners should keep in mind as they're working with their tax consultants? Any things that are helpful for you guys, or things that you constantly hate to see your owners doing that kind of hurts you in the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. What really, I can't stress enough, get the information as soon as you got your P&L statements completed for the year. Get those along with your rent roll to the consultant so they can start building the case. We still see a lot of stragglers. People get it to us. They wait till their notice comes out. They call us and panic. And, we only have X amount of time to negotiate all these values. And we need the information up front as early as we can, because once those notice values come out, roughly April 15 across the state, we've got till May 15 to file the protest, and they certify the roll in July, late July. So we only have so much time. Get the information to the consultant. And if you've got certain problems with properties, get on the phone with them, have a meeting with your consultant, and go over what is happening at the property. The appraisal district, like I said, they want a fair value. They'll listen to stories, and if they had huge crime, you had all kinds of things go into what the value was worth that January 1. So get with your consultant, get them all the information you think would be relevant, and let them do the work.
Perfect. Well, Mark, if anyone wants to find out more information about you guys, or what's the best way or a resource to reach out to you or one of your guys on your team?
Yeah, we're www.cmi-tax.com. That's probably the best way. Or you can give me a call, 214-368-1295. And we'll get a really good consultant to take a look at it, and we'll do our best. We own apartment properties ourselves. We manage properties ourselves, affiliated company. So we know that tax savings we're able to achieve drops straight down to your bottom line. So it's a big deal. We know it in multifamily.
Perfect.
Yeah, property taxes are the largest line item that borrowers have these days, and you have to work with somebody that kind of knows what is going on with these taxing authorities, and certainly the guys over at Cantrell McCulloch know what's going on. So death and taxes, we try to put the death off as far as we can, but taxes, we got to come and make a visit to them once a year. So we be proactive in what we do to try to mitigate try to get the lowest taxable valuation on these properties as possible. So we just certainly do
Paul, it's getting a
appreciate
little hot
Mark
there.
Cantrell visiting with us again today. Michael Becker, thank you very much. Well, we certainly do appreciate Mark coming on and sharing some bits of wisdom concerning property taxes. As you know, property taxes are the largest line item on your operating statement if you're going to own an apartment building. So the folks over at Cantrell McCulloch, they do a great job to try to mitigate and get you the lowest legal valuation on your property in the state of Texas. So they do a great job. We certainly do appreciate Mark being on. Again, on behalf of Michael Becker, Mark Cantrell, I'm Paul Peebles. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitalpodcast.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you next week for another great interview.